You're now watching the political segment on The Weekend Show. The government in Nigeria has three major arms of government, which is the executive, the legislative arm, and the judiciary. One of the most important bits to note is that they are meant to act as watchdogs over each other and perform oversight functions. In recent times, the National Assembly has been in the news for different reasons, be it budgeting or internal conversations, or even several voices looking for inclusion within the National Assembly. But what's extremely important is still focusing on the activities of the National Assembly, especially the Senate. A lot of compliance issues are constantly being raised in the country. A lot of implementation issues are being raised. Who is responsible for acting as a watchdog, for checkmating powers beyond what they're expected to do? And is the National Assembly, especially the 10th Senate, actually holding the executive arm accountable, or are they doing the bidding? These are the questions our guests have asked, and this is something which I know the National Assembly is trying to deal with as they have conversations, and they do have a workshop around legislative compliance. But joining us to have this conversation, we will be having an exclusive with Senator Musa Garba Maidoki, who was on this show last week, and we had an extensive conversation. And I can't wait to have a follow-up with you. Welcome back on the show, Senator.
Thank you very much. It's glad to be here.
It's good to have you back after a while, and I'll go straight into it. Being a senator in the 10th Assembly, as a member of the opposition, as someone who defeated a long-term serving member of the Senate, when someone speaks about the National Assembly and the Senate, nobody's talking about Senator Maidoki, they're talking about the Senate. How does this affect you as a senator representing your constituency?
Well, thank you very much. It's an exciting time for me, and it's a new learning all over again. What I learned for these few years is probably more than what I've learned all over my lifetime, particularly when it comes to dealings with government and prioritizing the diverse requirement of Nigerians, of regions, of states, of local government with the meager resources. It's a whole lot of ups and down negotiations, give and take on how to allocate the meager resources to go around the country. Your alliances, your communication skills, your persuasions determines how much you get for people or you don't get anything. And that is a big learning curve. And we are still trying to adjust and fit in. Hopefully, we'll improve over time.
So, something which I must ask you, some Nigerians have said that we no longer have an opposition party in Nigeria. It doesn't mean that there are no opposing voices. But the People's Democratic Party currently, just yesterday, the publicity secretary in Ondo State of PDP had put in a resignation which was rejected by his party, saying we need to have conversations and talk about it. All the politicians in Nigeria, and I've not seen if you have started working towards 2027. And I realized that the members of your party, they are now doing this as individuals and not as the People's Democratic Party. Do we actually still have an opposition, or is this now about people deciding to go based on their own ideologies and look out for themselves? And is that sustainable for our democracy?
Thank you very much. I wasn't hoping I was going to talk on...
No, we will talk about this, but we
PDP.
need to touch on...
No, but I will talk,
this,
certainly.
yes.
I came with a mindset that the party will galvanize our positions and give us guidelines and goalposts and KPIs of what they want us to achieve. But unfortunately, I can tell you, I am not sure for these 2 years that I've been into the Senate that we have met with the party to tell us what is their guidelines, what is their no-go area, what they are expected of us to achieve. So it seems that everybody is on his own. No guideline from any direction. And without prejudice to whatever anybody can say, whatever opposition we do is based on our conviction and the need of our people. So we are not galvanized in any way to provide any opposition based on the might of the political party, the PDP, for which we won election. This manifested itself even day one when we were supposed to choose our party leaders. We had expected, or I was told, because as a new member, it's the responsibility of the party to call us and put us together and emerge a leader with the input of the party and the senators. I'm not sure that was done. Everybody who wanted to be was allowed to aspire independently if he gets, without any mandate from our own party, which is the PDP. And I was the first person to raise alarm after the leadership emerged to say I'm thoroughly disappointed with the way and manner for which the leadership of the People's Democratic Party emerged in the Senate. But we closed our ranks together. I've said my own point, and we agreed to close the ranks. But I can tell you that as up to this moment, we have not sat down to strategize how we will provide credible opposition to government, the ruling party, and what is our strategy, and what is our objective, or what do we need to achieve in the 10th Senate for the PDP.
In recent time, all over the news, we've heard about escalations between different countries based on the conversation, nuclear weapons or nuclear warfare. What do we really know about this? And how does this affect the average Nigerian and African? Interestingly, we will be having an exclusive interview with the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, Robert Floyd. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Andy, thank you very much.
You know, it's interesting when I hear people talk about nuclear testing. However, your organization is focused on Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. What is this treaty about, and why is it more on banning tests of nuclear?
The concern started 80 years ago, because almost 80 years ago, the first ever atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and then a few days later in Nagasaki. And at that point, there was probably the greatest, almost instantaneous loss of human life at human hands. And the leaders of the world decided, we don't want to see this ever happen again. But it took quite a while to get together the agreement on treaties and commitments that countries would make to try and stop this indiscriminate loss of life happening. A ban on testing of a nuclear explosive device stops any country from being able to develop a nuclear weapon. A fundamental step in developing a nuclear weapon is you need to test it. So to put in place a ban stops the spread of nuclear capability, nuclear weapon capability, and also stops the further radical development of nuclear weapons. So the technical and scientific people, it took them decades to be able to come up with a system of monitoring stations that could be established around the world to give us absolute confidence that every country would know, is anybody testing a nuclear weapon? That is what my organization has in place today, is over 300 monitoring stations, picking up vibrations in the Earth's crust, sounds in the atmosphere, vibrations in the ocean, or radioactive material, particles and gases in the atmosphere, the telltale signs of a nuclear test explosion. And we are confident that we can detect a nuclear test explosion on any square kilometre of the face of this planet, on the land or the sea. That gives great confidence that we will know if somebody is seeking to develop a nuclear weapon. The nations of the world, including Nigeria, will know, because you are a valued partner in our organization.
Speaking from a sociological angle, where good exists, bad also exists. And in most cases, you find out that, like when there was the restriction on alcohol in the early 19th century, you find out that it becomes a viable business opportunity for people. When we talk about nuclear test bans, don't you think that this encourages the people engaged in this testing to carry it out in more covert fashion, as opposed to coming to you say, hey, we need a justification to be able to test this because we want to protect ourselves?
Yeah. It's interesting that the concept of covert testing has been essentially made impossible by our monitoring system. Is that, just back to the Hiroshima example, the size of the explosion in Hiroshima, it's measured in the equivalent of TNT, of chemical explosives, and it was 15,000 tons of TNT equivalent. That's a huge amount of TNT, 15 kilotons. Our network was designed not to detect something that big, but way, way, way smaller, down to the point of 1 kiloton. And in fact, we now could detect any nuclear explosion down at 0.5 kiloton magnitude. So nobody can actually do it in secret. Is if you're going to test a nuclear weapon, it will be more than 0.5 kiloton, and that will be detected. And so you can't do it in the shadows of darkness. We will be putting the light onto any test anywhere. Covert, in our case, is not really possible.
So this brings us to the question about recent events in the world. And some would argue that Israel, Netanyahu, since the late 80s, has spoken about countries like Iran building nuclear capabilities and capacity. As opposed to carrying out attacks on such countries, do the countries and countries who are parties to the treaty, do they defer to your organization before escalations, or it doesn't stop world leaders from taking decisions on their own around nuclear facilities being developed in some countries?
The situation in the Middle East has certainly been a tragic loss of life, in various states. Our role at a time like that over the last month is our monitoring stations are active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to detect if there is a nuclear explosion which has taken place, or any of the weapons used actually nuclear weapons. And it's very clear that was not the case, that they were more conventional explosive devices. So, it's important for the countries of the world to know that no nuclear weapons were used in that battle. But Andy, if I might, let me tell you another story that comes from the Iran situation. And this was way back in October last year. In the 5th of October, there were a couple of small seismic events, small earthquakes in northern Iran. And our system detected them and said they're just earthquakes, not particularly interested. But social media had a different idea. And in social media, there were people claiming these are nuclear test explosions conducted by Iran. And there are other people in social media saying, no, it's just an earthquake. And there was all of this backwards and forth, misinformation, even disinformation taking place, and at such a frenzied level, and even picked up by some more traditional media. I asked our analysts to look specifically at those two small earthquake-type events and to satisfy themselves, was there any evidence at all that they could be a nuclear explosion and a nuclear test may have taken place? And after their careful analysis and drawing in data from all around the world, including monitoring stations in the continent of Africa, they concluded that there is no evidence that these are anything other than just natural earthquakes, natural seismic events. We put that information back out into social media, and other people grabbed it and they reposted it, and that frenzy of activity in social media just died. And we were really encouraged by that when others were reposting our message, they were saying the impartial, independent experts have spoken. It is natural. And I think, Andy, it was the combination of the very best of science and technology with an impartial, independent organisation that allowed confidence to be restored that no, there had not been a nuclear test in Iran. So our role is really important, to be able to say, no, this is not a nuclear test, as well as to be able to determine when it is.
And that makes me wonder, how much misinformation and disinformation does your organization have to deal with? Because with the tide of social media right now, people almost never read disclaimers or rejoinders, and so they go with the first stories. And I think it's extremely impressive to hear about what happened last year. But a key part of it was being able to tell your own story, backed with the science and facts behind it. But do you tend to deal with a lot of this misinformation and disinformation, seeing activities around nuclear testing?
The data that we collect from the over 300 monitoring stations around the world is beamed by satellite into Vienna. And we put it all together, and then we then beam it back out by satellite into all of our 187 countries that are a part of the treaty, part of the organization. 187 out of only a possible 196. So almost every country in the world agrees to a ban on testing. But the point there, Andy, is that data is in the hands of all of the states. And so every state can analyze it and can work out what it means. And that then puts the ability for every state to conclude whether an event was possible nuclear explosion or was it just a natural earthquake.
President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, in his 65th Nigeria's 65th independence anniversary speech, claims that he had to take some tough decisions to get to Nigeria to where it is today, such as removing the fuel subsidy and also stabilizing the naira. However, some Nigerians have said you met the naira at about 700 naira, went as high as 1,500 naira or 1,700 at some point, and now bringing it down to 1,465, as the case may be, is not necessarily an improvement. However, the president has also insisted that non-oil revenues amounted to about 20 trillion during his administration. He's also spoken about credit schemes like the NELT Fund Students Loan and Credit Corps, which has been created. And also it is, and this is one of the issues which has been controversial from the speech, is the fact that he has stated that over 300 billion has been given to over 8 million households in Nigeria. Most people have said who exactly are the recipients of this, and other people are saying we are ready to see people willing to come out and talk about it. But the average Nigerian have also complained how much of this good stuff which we've seen on paper affects the everyday life of Nigerians. Insecurity is still an issue. Kidnapping is still something which we are battling with. Inflation, even though the government has said it has dropped highly, is still a different case when it comes to the average Nigerian going to the market to buy what they want. And for once, after several years of having not fuel scarcity or queues, we've seen the race between Pengasyn and Dangote, and how this threatens to affect Nigeria as a whole. However, we do have some stakeholders in Nigeria, in the political space, that have a conversation with us about what they think about Nigeria at 65, where we are and where we should be. In the studio with me, I have Deputy National Chairman and political stalwart, Dr. Ayo Olorunfemi from the Labour Party with us in the studio. Good morning, Doctor, and welcome to the Weekend Show. And happy independence.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Also joining us virtually, I have Honorable Segius Ogun, who the former House of Representatives member in the National Assembly, also a political leader in Edo State. And Honorable, correct me if I'm wrong, I also know you're a front runner for the Edo Central Senatorial seat in the next election. I don't know if that's too soon to talk about this, but welcome to the show and happy independence, Honorable.
Morning.
What are your thoughts on Nigeria 65, especially considering the speech and proclamations made by the president during his speech?
I think we haven't done too badly as a nation. I'm sure the Gen Zs will not be happy to hear that. But in the life of a nation, 65 years is not a whole lot. But that's not to say we could not have done better. The democracy we are talking about, we did not invent it. I mean, countries already practicing it. For us, it should have been plug and play. But we talk so much about the leaders that we have produced and how they have mismanaged things. But again, how did those leaders emerge? I always talk about this. In a situation where we have political parties, when people will emerge as aspirants, then to become candidates, you have to go through primary elections, and you spend so much to emerge. Then thereafter, you have to spend so much again to win the election. And when you get there, those that be sponsoring you, of course they want to get their money back. And then that's where the corruption starts from. People are not talking about governors doing flyover. Has anyone taken time to check because of those flyovers? So we have struggled politically, but I believe now we are having a discussion around this. If we keep talking to ourselves, we will turn the corner. I strongly believe in Nigeria. That is why I'm living in politics. Otherwise, I was very comfortable in private practice. But because I wanted to contribute my own quota, that is why I came into politics. And by the grace of God, we'll get there.
And we do appreciate the fact that you've seen both sides of the aisle, especially being in the House of Representatives, being in the private sector. And now I recall reading an article in 2023 where you were very positive that the Labour Party was going to win the election in 2023. Now, after that election, we've seen people switch alliances and allegiances. But my question is, we have primaries coming up next year, and we also do have another election in less than 2 years. Do you still have confidence in the selection and election process from the primaries down to the courts as it stands today?
That's a major problem. It's a major problem. Yes, absolutely. I was very confident that the Labour Party will win the election 2023. But that's not to say they did not win. But you know the way and manner things happened then. In retrospect, maybe Labour Party could have done more. In most places, they didn't have agents. I just experienced that in ADC now, where there is a new party. If you don't go deep down, then to recruit members of the party that will serve as agents, you might struggle. So that was part of the problem. But I would have thought that in these last few years, Labour Party would have come together to build. But unfortunately, it looks like we squandered the opportunity. We are practicing the presidential system of government. And the only way you can emerge, considering that we don't have what's it called now? That you cannot be nominated as a candidate of a party before you run for an office. So you must go out, and that's independent candidacy. Considering that we don't have that. So you can only be a member of a political party to emerge to become a candidate of the political party. And that process, like I said before, is flawed right now. I am not so positive that anything will change before next year, because most people that will be delegates are already pricing houses and pricing cars because they believe they're going to make so much money out of, being a delegate to vote for. Somebody ordinarily that you are presenting a member of your political party to go out there and represent you, and you're taking so much money from that person. I mean, it beats my imagination why that happens. And then when that person emerges, is he going to look for a whole lot of money to buy votes to go to that office? So if I'm buying your vote, why should I go here to serve you? If I'm going to serve you, you probably get a quarter of what I would have done for you. So these are things that we need to talk to ourselves about. And the Gen Zs came out in 2023, you saw them, voted for Obi, but unfortunately, Nigeria being what it is, INEC messed up the whole thing. And we are not probing INEC. We paid so much for the server. You said that was a glitch. In 2019, they used the server. They said they didn't use it at all. They shouldn't get away with all this. But like I said, we are talking about it now. Doc is there in the studio. And maybe someday, we'll look ourselves in the eyes and say, this is the way we must go, and then probably get there.
Honorable, so with the ADC, it's a good collaboration, and I'll call it almost a conglomerate of people from the APC, PDP, Labour, across board. Some of them agreed, and others coming to say we need to make things better. But you've mentioned the Gen Zs twice, and I know you're very young at heart from your antecedents. We know that, but something I struggle with, and I think a lot of young Nigerians struggle with, is the fact that we feel there's no room for young people in the ADC, especially based on its current constitution of the people who we see there. A lot of young people, and these Gen Zs who you mentioned, think that this is just going back to class of 99. And so it's people who were relevant between 99 to maybe 2015 who are all there. And so ADC coming into power, it's like going back to the former gang.
No, I don't think so at all. ADC is a child of necessity. As you remember, if you remember the fact that PDP had their issues, they still have those issues right now. And then Labour Party, that was supposed to be the bride of the nation from 2022, also had issues. There was a Supreme Court judgment that both sides were now struggling to interpret. And I don't blame the Labour Party alone for that, because the highest court in the land will give a judgment that nobody can now interpret. That's where we are now. And in the constitutional democracy, you cannot afford not to have the rule of law.
It is political season as we gear towards the 2027 elections. How does this work to support the goals and the ambitions and the dreams of the Nigerian masses? This is what we're always concerned about. How does this translate to the average Nigerian? Joining us to have this conversation, we have Chief Peter Ameh, who is former National Chairman, Interparty Advisory Council, IPAC, an ex-2019 presidential candidate and National Secretary for the CUPP. Welcome back to the Weekend Show, Chief.
Thank you for having me, Malaki.
And we also have Barrister Kola Alapini, who is an international human rights lawyer. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you very much.
I'll start with you, Kola. We have seen in the past some people have lost their seats in the National Assembly because of the process in which they decamp from one place to the other. Now you have governors who are moving from one party to the other just because they want to guarantee their political future. But interestingly, just yesterday, and I'm sure we've all seen it, the video of Sim Fubara, the suspended governor of, well, his government was suspended, so I'll call him the suspended governor of Rivers State, and the former governor of Rivers State, the FCT minister, VK. And it's been said that there's been a peace agreement brokered and all is well. I actually watched both of them speak. However, it has been alleged, and I repeat, alleged, that one of the criteria for the peace agreement is for Sim Fubara not to run for re-election in 2027. Now, for a country where we just celebrated Democracy Day, and the president has been hailed for his democratic principles and tendencies, knowing that Rivers State was very vital in the last election to the president, what's your take on this as an analyst and a lawyer?
Oh, well, more of an analyst. It's about the political survival of the president. And when you tie that down with the APC chairman we were discussing earlier on with Chief Ame, when you tie that with Ganduje's resignation, or abrupt resignation that came out of the blues, you can see that the political pot is being stirred. Number one, Fubara was, the gentleman, Governor Fubara, was very, I would say, uncalculating when it came to the debacle in River State. He was warned before he got there, famously, by Ayo Fayose. Initially, I think he was thinking more like a civil servant than a politician. He was accountant general to the governor, and he ought to have known how to manage his master, and he's failed woefully with that. Immediately he crossed the Rubicon with Wike. He should have gone all the way fighting, all guns blazing. And then he comes up with a contradictory statement, even when he was removed, by saying, oh, I don't even want to go there. Do you know what I want? Did you see the clips? One of the churches seems to be one of the places where they all drop their messages, you know. And then the peace thing. First, I think the president didn't handle it well. If he didn't want the thing to have blown out of proportion. And then eventually when he stepped in, he couldn't contain the issue because both parties went back to the battle lines and they were still fighting until the president now brought in the sole administrator. Maybe that has now shaken up Governor Fubara to see, hey, you know, and people will have spoken to him, you're going to lose all. There's nothing to lose. Because the man that you're fighting is in a formidable position than you are. He's the minister of the FCT and he has access to funds. The FCT was removed from TSA.
Really well from the FCT.
He's done very well. I think he's probably the best minister of FCT we've seen in the last 2 decades. You know, with all the innovations and the infrastructure that he has put into place. You might not like his politics, but you can't fault his deliverance. And then when you now tie that with what is happening with the APC chairman's position, with Ganduje resigning abruptly, we hear the former governor, Kwankwaso, is coming into the party. That tells you that the president is serious about River State, being the treasure base of the nation, due to his oil wealth. He's serious about Kano, for the high turnout of voters. Now, whether it's accurate or not is another question on its own. But Kano, historically, River State, and until recently, Lagos State, used to determine who becomes president of Nigeria. But the president lost in Lagos the last time. I'm sure he's going to ensure that doesn't happen again. The FCT has always been the scorecard for the incumbent. Historically, presidents lose the FCT. This is their backyard. And the residents of the FCT usually able to evaluate the president at close range. Maybe for him closing the road to the airports and everything, whenever he's going out of the country, they always inflicted damning results on the president. So in a nutshell, and a week is a long time in politics. Who will have envisaged all this happening last week, Saturday? So it will be interesting what will happen next week.
Chief Ame, it's interesting because both of you have been on this show and we've had this conversation, especially last year around the Democracy Day and Tinubu's 100 days in office.